Leaked footage that appears to show Big U involved in the killing of Nipsey Hussle's close friend Fats is spreading rapidly across platforms right now. Clips are circulating on YouTube, Twitter, and podcasts alike. One particular name continues to surface in discussions tied to one of the most puzzling murders in Crenshaw history. That name is Big U, and the victim people keep referencing is Fats. Stephen Fats Donaldson, co-founder of All Money In Records, Nippy's childhood associate and one of the key figures who helped build the marathon movement from the ground up. He was shot and killed outside a dispensary in Hyde Park on September 29, 2017. The attack came from someone in a passing vehicle. The case remains unsolved to this day. No arrests have been made, no charges filed, and no official closure has ever been reached. Now, with Big U currently in federal custody facing a 43-count RICO indictment that includes murder-related charges, the internet is asking a question that authorities have never publicly answered. Could Big U have been connected to Fat's death? To be clear up front, the federal government has not charged Big U in relation to Fat's murder. It is not included in the indictment, but the claims circulating online are extensive. And to understand why people are drawing these links, you have to look at the broader context. So let's break it down properly. First, it's important to understand that Fats was far more than just a friend in the background. He was not simply a supporting character in Nippy's story. Stephen Donaldson was one of the foundational pillars behind All Money In Records, the label that Nippy used as the base to build his entire career. The philosophy behind it, all money in, no money out, evolved into a cultural statement. Fats was present during the early planning stages, when these ideas were still being shaped, back when Nippy was selling mixtapes out of a parking lot at a shopping center, before the Atlantic Records deal, before the Marathon clothing brand, and before any Grammy recognition. Fats was there through all of it. And when Nippy eventually sat down with Atlantic Records in 2017 to finalize a major deal, one of the biggest milestones of his career, he made his stance clear. He stated that Fats would remain a partner and that his share would still be honored even after his passing. Think about that for a moment. Fats had already been killed, yet Nippy still allocated his percentage. That shows how significant their connection was. So when Fats was murdered in September 2017, it was not treated like just another statistic.
It became a lasting loss that Nipsey carried with him until his own death less than 2 years later. The fact that Fat's murder has never been solved, with no publicly identified suspects or charges, is exactly what continues to fuel speculation online. And now, with Big U's arrest and the details emerging around him, that speculation has intensified even further. To follow the reasoning behind these claims, you have to go back and examine the origins of the relationship between Big U and Nipsey. Big U, whose real name is Eugene Henley Jr., was long regarded as one of the most influential and feared figures in South Los Angeles. He previously led the Hyde Park faction of the Rolling 60s neighborhood Crips. He also served 13 years in federal prison after being convicted in connection with a failed attempt to rob an undercover deputy of 33 pounds of cocaine in 1991. After his release in 2004, he began reshaping his public image, at least outwardly. He launched a non-profit organization called Developing Options, formed connections within the industry, including ties to Suge Knight, who reportedly provided early financial backing upon his return, and positioned himself as someone capable of mediating conflicts within communities often defined by tension. He later received coverage from the Los Angeles Times, and he also appeared in the 2021 FX documentary Hip Hop Uncovered. And somewhere along that timeline, he crossed paths with a young Crenshaw rapper named Nipsey Hussle. According to federal investigators, Big U and Nipsey began building a connection around 2008. Big U reportedly helped support the early stages of Nipsey's career, giving him a foothold when he was still emerging. Both men shared ties to the Rolling 60s, which made their connection feel natural from the start. But listen, this is where things start to get messy. That relationship eventually broke down. Based on details outlined in the federal indictment, the conflict reportedly began over something relatively simple, a disagreement involving equipment at Big U's business location. Nipsey didn't stay quiet about the situation and went on to release a diss track aimed directly at Big U. Big U later claimed publicly that the issue had been resolved and that they had reconciled. He even spoke about it in Hip Hop Uncovered, as if it were behind them. However, intercepted phone calls obtained by federal authorities reportedly tell a very different version of events, and that discrepancy is where things start to shift. Now hold up, this is where it really escalates. The federal case against Big U isn't limited to charity fraud and extortion allegations. Prosecutors describe what they call the Big U Enterprise, an alleged organized crime network operating in a structured mafia-like manner from around 2010 up until his arrest in March 2025.
That's roughly 15 years of alleged activity, all reportedly concealed behind nonprofit initiatives, mentorship programs, and anti-gang efforts. According to the Department of Justice, high-profile individuals, including Shaquille O'Neal, contributed to his charity. Draymond Green reportedly donated $20,000, and the city of Los Angeles is said to have routed funds through the mayor's gang reduction program into his nonprofit. Prosecutors further alleged that Big U personally diverted and kept those funds. That's the context surrounding the individual at the center of these claims. Now back to Nippy. Federal prosecutors claim that in wiretapped conversations from late 2022 into early 2023, Big U made statements that raised serious concern. On December 31, 2022, he allegedly said on a recorded call that he held more power than Nipsey Hussle and that he had already disciplined him in the past. Then on January 1, 2023, just one day later, he was allegedly recorded saying that anyone who chooses to beef with him would be killed, without exception. Now, these recorded conversations took place years after Nippy had already passed away. But listen, what they seem to reveal is a mindset, a recurring pattern of thinking, the type of behavior prosecutors often point to when arguing that someone relied on intimidation and force as tools to maintain influence and control over their surroundings. Then came Loose Cannon. Loose Cannon, a Rollin' 60s affiliate who had already appeared on multiple YouTube channels and podcasts discussing LA gang culture, went on No Jumper and made a claim that immediately changed the tone of the conversation. He alleged that Big U and others may have had prior awareness of Nipsey Hussle's death before it occurred, suggesting it was an internal hit, something orchestrated from within. In response, Big U sent a cease and desist letter to No Jumper, demanding the removal of the episode. But here's the key detail. When federal investigators began constructing their RICO case, they reached out directly to Adam22, the host of No Jumper, requesting that cease and desist letter as potential evidence. Think about what that signals. The government wasn't only focused on fraud allegations, they were actively examining any possible link between Big U and the circumstances surrounding Nippy's death. They were looking for documentation tied to attempts to silence claims related to that incident. And that's when online discussions began pushing the narrative even further. Because if Big U allegedly had prior awareness of Nippy's death and also has a documented pattern of responding harshly to perceived disrespect, then what about Fats? What about the man who was killed less than 2 years before Nippy? The man whose murder has never been solved? That question still hasn't received an official answer, and that lack of closure continues to stand out. September 29, 2017, Hyde Park, Los Angeles. Around 10:45 at night, Stephen Fats Donaldson was outside a marijuana dispensary on the 5900 block of West Boulevard. He was working security, staying close to the business and protecting what he was part of. A light-colored sedan passed by, followed by another vehicle behind it. Shots were fired from inside one of the cars. Fats ran inside but collapsed shortly after. At 11:10 p.m., Stephen Giles Donaldson, age 30, co-founder of All Money and Records and Nipsey Hussle's childhood friend, was pronounced dead at the scene. LAPD confirmed the core details, with Detective Dave Garrio briefly addressing the media before the case went quiet. No suspect publicly identified, no arrests made, no charges filed. The investigation eventually went cold and has remained that way since, leaving Nippy to carry that loss forward. At that point in his life, he had just received a Grammy nomination, finalized his Atlantic Records deal, and was nearing completion of Victory Lap.
These recordings come from years after Nippy had already passed, yet they expose a clear mindset and recurring pattern. What they suggest is the type of reasoning prosecutors rely on when arguing that a person consistently used force and fear to keep control over those around him. Then, Loose Cannon entered the picture. Loose Cannon, affiliated with Rollin' 60s and known for appearances across multiple YouTube platforms and podcasts discussing LA gang culture, appeared on No Jumper and delivered a statement that immediately escalated everything. He claimed that Big U and others were aware of Nipsey Hussle's death before the shooting occurred, describing it as an inside job that had been orchestrated from within. Big U pushed back by issuing a cease and desist to No Jumper, insisting the episode be taken down. But here is the critical part. When federal agents began assembling their RICO case, they approached Adam 22, the host of No Jumper, requesting that cease and desist letter because they considered it potential evidence. Think about that for a second. The authorities were not only pursuing financial crimes, they were actively examining possible links between Big U and the circumstances surrounding Nippy's death. They were tracking down documentation that showed attempts to silence discussion about it. And that is where online discussions pushed the narrative even further. Because if Big U supposedly had prior awareness of Nippy's death and a known pattern of people being punished or worse for disrespect, then what about the unanswered questions? What about the individual who was killed less than 2 years before Nippy? The case tied to that killing has never been resolved. No official conclusion was ever provided, and that lack of closure stands out. On September 29, 2017, in Hyde Park, Los Angeles, around 10:45 at night, Stephen Fats Donaldson was positioned outside a marijuana dispensary on the 5900 block of West Boulevard. He was employed as a security guard, staying connected to the family operation and protecting what required protection. A light-colored sedan passed by, followed closely by another vehicle. Someone inside opened fire.
Fats rushed inside and then collapsed. At 11:10 p.m., Stephen Giles Donaldson, 30 years old, co-founder of All Money In Records and Nipsey Hussle's lifelong close friend, was declared dead at the scene. LAPD verified the core details. Detective Dave Guerrillo gave a brief statement to the media before the case faded from view. No suspect was publicly identified, no arrest followed, and no charges were filed. The investigation went cold and remained that way, leaving Nippy to live with it. He had just received a Grammy nomination. The Atlantic deal had recently been finalized. Victory Lap was nearing completion. No conviction has been secured, but that alone doesn't clear the air. When you line up the documented patterns tied to Big U, the timeline starts to feel harder to dismiss. Then there's SKG, the former death row artist who has long stood as one of his most outspoken accusers. She told TMZ that Big U spent years intimidating the Crenshaw community. She went further, directly alleging that he was involved in ordering Nippy's murder. But hold up, one detail adds another layer of complexity. SKG has also stated that at one point, both Nippy and Fats allegedly played a role in setting her up for an attack tied to Big U after he felt disrespected following a tense meeting at LA radio station KDA. In that account, Nippy and Fats weren't always opponents of Big U, but were at times aligned with him. That alone shows these relationships weren't black and white. What it really points to is a web of shifting alliances, obligations, betrayals, and changing loyalties over the years. It was never a straight path, and that ambiguity is part of why Fats' unsolved killing remains so difficult to unpack. On the federal side, investigators reportedly have access to around 20,000 intercepted phone calls connected to Big U. There are also multiple audio and video recordings, and the superseding indictment filed in early 2026 introduced additional claims while tying the ongoing conflict between Big U and Nippy more directly to the original case. The investigation is still active, and developments continue to surface. Meanwhile, Big U's son, Jabari,
also known as Baby Yuli, was fatally shot on Halloween night in 2025 outside a smoke shop on 69th near Figueroa in South LA. The shooting was carried out by someone in a vehicle. No arrests have been made and no official motive has been confirmed publicly. And listen, this pattern of violence feels like it keeps repeating itself without an end in sight. So where does all of this ultimately lead? Here's what has been verified.